What's up, all you beautiful people? Today we are going to be talking about a little movie called Shazam. So we're finally doing our first video on the DC universe, which is contentious to say the least. DC universe has a lot of issues. It has a lot of ups and downs. I'm going to talk just a little bit about it before we actually go into Shazam and just the fact of how crazy everything is. So I think that Shazam is like the last movie before James Gunn stuff really starts kicking in. I know there's a few post-credit scenes things in this movie that try to explain a couple of, but then we have Flashpoint later this year, which I think is supposed to be the jumping off starting point of James Gunn stuff. So if you don't know, James Gunn is now the new like Kevin Feige of DC. So basically DC has like a head guy kind of overseeing the whole universe and trying to actually make everything mold together and make sense, which is why Marvel is so good, or at least was really, really good. Still good, but having some issues for sure. We're gonna jump right into this movie. I'm gonna try to go over the plot, but granted it's very forgettable to say the least. Now I will say I'm actually probably significantly higher on this movie than most people probably are. I had a really good time watching this movie, but stay tuned to the end where I give my actual real legitimate ranking. This is the second Shazam movie if you don't know, and I mean if you haven't watched the first one, go watch it because I actually really enjoy that movie. I think it's very funny, a little bit heartwarming, a little bit of emotion in it. I actually think it's one of the better DC movies. Actually had high hopes for this movie until I saw the trailer come out. And the trailer might be one of the worst trailers I've ever seen in recent memory. It just looked so bad and so ridiculous, and there was just so much random madness bullshit happening with dragons and sorceries, we'll call it that. All the superheroes and just a lot of lore being dropped, and you could just tell that this movie is going to be all over the place just from watching the trailer. And it was. I still had a good time watching it. So, but anyways, we open in a museum and we have these two daughters of Atlas, and they are bad people and they steal staff, and then they start turning people into dust. And then we jump to Billy and all the people and all the other kids, and they're all a little bit grown up. I mean, I haven't watched the original Shazam since it was in theaters, so I didn't even remember like how much younger they looked in it until I looked up pictures. I was like, oh yeah, it's clearly been 4 years or whatever since the first movie came out. It's so hard because when you have like people in their like fully grown adults, you can have 4 years between movies and they can still look the same, but obviously the difference between a 14-year-old or a 13 or 14-year-old aging up to a 17 or 18-year-old is such a significant difference, and that's what Billy Batson does in this movie. Billy Batson's the main character. They make a big deal of saying that he's turning 18 in 5 months. That'll all come into play later in the movie when things get a little bit weird. Anyway, so we come back to them and they have this really cool dungeon and a really cool lair. They're having a good time fighting crime. I actually really enjoyed this opening like kind of action scene. And I guess the witches, we're called witches. I gotta stop trying to do plural sorcerers. The witches kind of do a little bit of action by killing all those people, but it only lasts a little bit. But my main intro for the action sequence in this movie is all of the Shazamies flying around and actually saving people and trying to do their best at being superheroes, which is a trope I always like to see, is when specifically like younger superheroes are trying to come into their own and figure out how to be a superhero. So I think it was fun. I really enjoyed watching them all run around and all of them use their different powers and all that stuff. And it was a pretty fun little bridge scene. I like the music. There's a lot of things I do like about this movie. I know some people mention that the music is kind of cheesy and kind of overplayed, but I like it. It works for me, and I think the action looks good up until the end of the movie. The final fight scene is a little bit rough. Everything they do in this is really fun, but then we kind of get into kind of the crux and the slight bit of emotion that this movie does have that actually made me feel a little bit, which wasn't something I was expecting out of this movie. They did have it in the first movie, but they kind of like expand upon it a tiny bit. Like it doesn't go too hard in it, but they expanded it just a little bit. They come back and Billy is basically trying to keep everybody together and keep the team cohesive. What's their saying is that all or none. So they have a saying that is all or none. So they do everything together or they don't do it at all. And Billy's trying to keep everybody together and hold on really tight, and kind of like the crux and emotion behind that is that Billy has a lot of attachment issues because I think he never met his father. And then the one scene that killed me, because it was just so fucking sad in the first movie, when Billy goes to find his mom because he's deserted from his mom. He's in a foster home, and that's why he lives with all these kids and these other people that have taken all of them in. But he goes and finds his mom, and his mom doesn't recognize him and basically doesn't care that he came and found her. And it's really sad because she basically just tells him to fuck off. This 14-year-old Billy kid is really upset by it, obviously. He has some attachment issues. He doesn't want people leaving him, and that's kind of his whole crux and little story arc in the movie. I think that little bit and certain little moments in there actually do hit, and I think they do work a little bit. We move on. The sorcerer is really mad at like Billy and stuff, but like I said, this is going to be a very jumbled, shitty recap compared to my normal recaps because it's hard to remember, and this movie is all over the place. And I want to make this one quick because I don't really care about doing a longer video on this. But the there's another wizard. Oh man, this shit's gonna get so convoluted. There's a wizard that gave him his powers, and he is basically super mad at Billy because Billy broke the staff and basically gave the staff to these witches, and now these witches have the staff and all this power, and they're basically the gods, and they're coming back and trying to connect to the world. Oh man, this is gonna be so fun. Billy's best friend Freddy, he meets this girl, and they kind of start having a little thing, a little bit of crushing and all this stuff, and it turns out that she is one of the three witches, because there's three witches, I guess, three daughters of Atlas, and you figure that out. One of them looks really young for some reason, but she's 6,000 years old. We kind of go into the point where the witches come and find all the kids, and they zap Freddy and get rid of his powers, because apparently they can do that with the staff. They don't really explain what the staff does exactly and what its abilities are. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm not here to have all that explained to me in this kind of movie. And they take him back as prisoner, and now he's with the wizard, the guy who gave Billy his superpowers. And so now he's with the wizard in the prison. The Shazamies have to try to figure out how to break him out now, so they write the witches a little letter and make them come back into Philadelphia where they're all at. They have another little battle, and they start taking away their powers, and they end up capturing one of the witches. But plot twist, it turns out that the witch wanted to be captured because they have to get this little seed thing that plants a tree. Apparently restores this god world that the witches are from. Man, explaining this stuff out loud is making me just a little bit less high on this movie because it's just how ridiculous it all sounds. So they get that seed, they bring it back. The sisters, they don't all agree with each other, and one of the witches decides that she's just going to do what she wants, and she goes and plants the seed in the human world instead of the god world. And in the human world, the tree is really fucked up and summons all these monsters into Philadelphia. So now all the Shazamies have to go and fight the witches, or not the witches, but all these monsters and the witches. One of the witches gets killed by another witch, and then that witch kills her, rides around on her dragon, chasing around, what is she chasing around the whole time? I don't even know what she's doing. God, I don't remember. She's just around in Philadelphia just terrorizing people, I guess? Blowing shit up with her dragon, fighting Shazam, the main Shazam, Billy Batson, every once in a while. We get to a point where Billy realizes that he can overload the staff like a battery, which is a cliche thing that we've never heard before, ever. So if he puts enough power into it, it'll explode and be like a nuclear bomb. So they get this little dome thing that one of the witches sets up that can't let basically a little shield. Nothing can get out of it or in it. And so Billy and the one witch on her dragon fight in the middle of this dome, and they blow up the battery, and that's it. And it is a very boring, very repetitive fight scene that was just very underwhelming. So yeah, that's basically most of the movie. After that, Billy dies from that explosion. And then Wonder Woman makes a cameo, and she uses her spark because she's a demigod and only gods can spark the staff back to life, which gives all the Shazamies their powers. So she sparks the staff back to life. And God, it's just ridiculous. She sparks the staff back to life, and then Billy basically raises from the dead. They like bury him and everything too. It's not just one of those things where he blows up and then takes a deep breath and comes back, and he comes out of the ground and then he starts hitting on Wonder Woman. I don't know. Things just get a little bit weird. That's basically Shazam. And honestly, this is the first time I've experienced this in making my videos, but after just doing a recap of the plot and what happens in this movie, I think maybe I'm not as high on it as I thought it was. There were just moments that I enjoyed, and I did have a good time in the theater watching it. So I think that's just what I thought when I was coming out. But yeah, now explaining everything, this movie's kind of ass. Well, that's my review of Shazam: Fury of the Gods. Let me know what you thought of Shazam: Fury of the Gods in the comments down below, and then give me a like and subscribe. So after realizing how bad this movie actually kind of was, I just ended my video and totally forgot to actually give this a ranking. So after this being said and how this movie's kind of ass, I think we're going to give this movie a solid 4 out of 10.